Kneeling in prayer, Muslim students at the University of South Florida didn't shy away from publicly practicing their religion Friday. But the law enforcement presence nearby hinted at the strong need for security.
We have always had the security of being able to practice our faith and the right to practice our faith in peace. I am genuinely terrified for the America that my children might have to grow up in if this doesn't stop today, and it doesn't stop now.
Earlier in the day, Muslim students stood beside Christian and Jewish leaders in the community.
Governor DeSantis signing a bill into law. It allows the state to identify domestic terrorist organizations. House Bill 1471 prohibits the use of legal frameworks like Sharia law and courts and cracks down on organizations it determines are domestic terrorist groups.
But we've been very strong in Florida from the beginning on all of this nonsense and doing whatever we can to keep the people of this state safe.
They thought Florida would just fold like a cheap lawn chair in a hurricane. Just sit back, smile, and say, yeah, sure, go right ahead. Rewrite the rules. No big deal. Yeah. About that. Instead, Ron DeSantis and the Florida legislature stepped in and basically said, absolutely not, try again. And suddenly groups like Council on American Islamic Relations, who were getting very comfortable, they're now looking around like, wait, hold on, that wasn't supposed to happen. Funny how that works, right? Especially when you remember there were already cases tied to ISIS and Al-Qaeda that had the Federal Bureau of Investigation raising eyebrows. But sure, of course, you know what? Totally nothing to worry about here. Just your average Tuesday night in Florida, right? And now it's spreading. Texas jumps in with Greg Abbott and Ken Paxton. HUD gets involved. Arizona starts moving. Oh, and look, Donald Trump he's now there at the national level. But yeah, definitely not a pattern. Totally random. Now, here's the part that they really don't want you connecting. What just happened in Florida didn't just adjust a law. It flipped the entire script. So stick with me, guys, because this goes way deeper than what they're letting on. And hey, guys, if you enjoy watching the dots actually get connected instead of aggressively ignored, go ahead and subscribe. And of course, if by the end of the video you're sitting there thinking like, okay, that was worth it, hit the like button on your way out. Oh, and quick heads up, if Medicare has you feeling like you need a translator and a lawyer just to kind of pick a plan, there is free help for Medicare through Chapter. I left a link down below, and you should also see the phone number for Chapter right here. Give our friends over there a call, totally free. Let's go ahead and start here, guys. There was a very real assumption, quiet, confident, almost smug, that Florida would eventually bend. Not overnight, not dramatically, but slowly, quietly, inch by inch. You know the playbook, change a little here, normalize a little there, shift the culture just enough so nobody really notices until it's already done. And the thinking was very simple. Florida, beaches, tourism, retirees, Disney, Universal Studios, adults arguing over fast passes in a Disney line, not exactly the place you expect pushback, right? Or at least not hard pushback. Wrong, because what a lot of people completely misread was the backbone of the state itself. And more importantly, they misread the leadership, because sitting right there was Governor Ron DeSantis, backed by the Florida legislature and watching, not reacting emotionally, not rushing, just watching and waiting. And while all of this was building under the surface, the assumption stayed the same. Well, they won't do anything. They'll just stay quiet. They'll avoid the controversy. Yeah. That assumption didn't age well.
I mean, we did do the designation for both the Muslim Brotherhood and CARE. This is something that has been a long time coming. I know the federal government's now working in a similar direction. The legislature is working on statutory laws that are going to impact this area. So I think our executive order is kind of the beginning. I think you're going to see statutory codification of how we handle different terror designations. But I welcome the lawsuit, because what will happen is that will give the state of Florida discovery rights to be able to subpoena the bank records, to be able to do that. And honestly, it'd give us even more reason, I believe. And so this is something that I know our Attorney General is ready, willing, and able to be fighting on this. And so that's they have every right to sue, and then we're going to have a right to get the information that we need to make sure. But our agencies are on notice about how any of our programs or any of our operations are impacted or not impacted. And so to the extent that they can be, then they're going to have a basis to be able to protect the people and the taxpayers from that. So I'd stay tuned there. But I would expect there to be some follow-on legislation. I know we've got a lot of members of the legislature have been really working hard on these things. And I think Texas, if you look, I think Texas did before the federal government announced. And so Texas has a little bit more robust architecture in their statutes than Florida does. I think you're going to see the legislature probably mirror what Texas has done, and ultimately, that's going to be in the best interest of the people. But the money is really significant. And look, we may get a lot of information on this if they bring the lawsuit. So we're definitely not running from that. We welcome it, and I think that folks will be pleased with our actions.
So now here's where it gets really interesting, because while everybody's distracted, arguing online, scrolling nonsense, debating pineapple on pizza, which you really shouldn't put pineapple on pizza, I'm sorry, and definitely not anchovies, real changes are happening on the ground. Gradual, steady, easy to miss. In places like Orlando, Tampa, across Florida, population shifts, community growth, more mosques, more cultural infrastructure, more visible presence in local communities. And now, growth by itself, that's not unusual, okay? It's not. Florida grows, we know that. This is what Florida does. It's a popular, beautiful state. Not to mention there's no state income tax. But the key here is how it was described. Not loud, not aggressive, but methodical, strategic, quietly embedding into different layers of civil life. And most people didn't even notice, or didn't think it mattered, or just assumed, like always, somebody else is going to deal with it.
President Donald Trump signed an executive order earlier today that designates chapters of the Muslim Brotherhood as foreign terrorist organizations. The Muslim Brotherhood is a Sunni Islamist organisation founded in Egypt back in 1928, and the White House argues this designation will help the US combat the group's transnational network, which is set to fuel terrorism against US interests and allies in the Middle East. Army, is there going to be much resistance to this move by Donald Trump? Surely the Democrats aren't going to side with the Islamist Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah. First of all, I spent over a year researching and interviewing members of the Muslim Brotherhood around the world. I went to Cairo and Istanbul and Beirut, Germany, and I met with dozens of Muslim Brotherhood leaders and lay people around the world. And I can tell you it's one of the most dangerous organizations that exists. So kudos to the president for designating them. I'm asking and pushing this for years as a terrorist organization. As far as your question when it comes to the left, they're going to cry foul this. Of course they are. The Muslim Brotherhood was telling me that they have co-opted the left. Like that was part of their strategy. And they of course adopt the language of the left. They talk about victimhood and colonization, right, and occupation. These are all things that they use. They know that the left kind of is attracted to that, and the left has been, for the most part, supportive. The left makes arguments for them, saying they're not a political organization, they're a religious organization. You can't go after them, you can't attack them. While they are those things, and by the way, so is organizations like Hamas, but their main point of business is terror. Like Hamas, and I mentioned Hamas a couple of times because Hamas is a direct offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. Al-Qaeda is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. There are almost a dozen terrorist organizations across the world that consider themselves part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Their slogan is jihad is the way, and dying for Allah is the greatest good. That's their slogan. This is not me saying this. This is them saying this about themselves. They're incredibly dangerous. And by the way, they have really spent a lot of time and effort in Europe and the United States. The largest Islamic organizations in the U.S., CARE, the student organizations, are part of the Muslim Brotherhood. They're associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. And also, very dangerously, they are really involved in the jails. Most people who convert to Islam in the jails do it under the auspices of the Muslim Brotherhood, and 35,000 to 40,000 people a year are converting to Islam in our jails. And the latest estimates are that 15% of the total population of jails are actually Muslim, and it's a direct response directly because
fascinating.
The Muslim Brotherhood has been converting them. Yeah.
Meanwhile, the scale kept increasing year after year, community after community, and the deeper it went, the harder it became to ignore, because eventually it stops being background noise and it starts becoming something bigger, something that forces a response. And this is where things stop being abstract and it starts getting real, because it wasn't just growth anymore at that point. There were real cases. There were actual cases, real investigations, real convictions. We're talking about individuals tied to groups like ISIS, others connected to plots inspired by Al Qaeda. I mean, we're not even talking about overseas, right here in the United States on U.S. soil. Some of it tied directly back to states like Florida. And when that happens, guess who shows up? The Federal Bureau of Investigations. Yeah, so the FBI, they don't exactly show up for book club meetings. No, the FBI shows up when things cross a line. Investigations, arrests, sentences. This wasn't hypothetical anymore at this point. This wasn't, well, what if? This was documented, prosecuted, on the record, and yet somehow the public conversation still tried to act like probably nothing. Don't overthink it. Move right along. Right. Because nothing says totally fine like federal investigations tied to terror groups. Now, at some point, people stop ignoring it. At some point, somebody steps in. Now, hang on for a second, guys. If this feels like something that people are not talking about enough, send this video to one person who needs to see it. Seriously, don't wait, because what comes next? This is where everything shifts. So now we hit this pressure point, because this is not just about isolated incidents anymore. This is about influence, and specifically, who's influencing the system itself. Enter the Council on American Islamic Relations. Now, for years, they've been treated like a standard civil rights organizations, invited into conversations, given a seat at the table, consulted, quoted, respected. But here's where the tension comes in. There have also been serious accusations, serious scrutiny, and some very uncomfortable questions about past associations and influence. And suddenly the conversation shifts from, are there problems, to who's shaping the response to those problems, right? Because if you're influencing civic systems, legal discussions, and public policy, that's not small. That is not background. That is power. So once that realization hits, everything changes. Because now it's not just about what's happening on the ground. It's about who's guiding what happens next. And that right there, guys, this is the moment things reached a breaking point. Just like that, the waiting ended, because this is the moment Florida stopped observing and they started acting. Enter Governor Ron DeSantis. No long speeches about we're monitoring the situation. No endless committees. No, we'll circle back on this in 6 months. None of that nonsense. This was a line in the sand. Clear, direct, no confusion, because from the perspective of Governor Ron DeSantis and the Florida legislature, the question wasn't complicated anymore. No, it was simple. Who decides what laws govern Florida? Okay, and the answer? It's not foreign systems. It's not outside influence. It's not parallel anything. Florida decides. And you could feel the shift immediately. The tone shifted, the moment changed. I mean, because suddenly this wasn't something happening quietly in the background. Now it was front and center. Now it was official. Now it had teeth. And for the people who thought nothing would ever happen, yeah, this is where that confidence started to crack. All right. This is where it gets really simple, okay? Because the Florida legislature passed a bill, HB 1471. And look, strip away all the legal jargon, all the political noise. Here's what this HB 1471 basically says, okay? If you're in a Florida courtroom, you follow American law. That's it. No foreign legal systems, no outside frameworks, no importing rules from somewhere else. And yes, this includes Sharia law, flat out. Not considered, not applied, not even entertaining Sharia law. Now think about how direct that is. There's no gray area here. There's no wiggle room. No, we'll maybe in certain cases use Sharia law. No, not at all. This is a hard stop. And that alone would have been a big move. But it didn't stop there, because once that door closes, it forces everything else into the open. And for a lot of people who actually thought that this would never happen, this wasn't just surprising. This was a complete shock to the system. So if you thought HB 1471 was strong, this is where it goes from strong to, oh wow, they're not playing around. Because Ron DeSantis didn't just stop at courts and legal language. He expanded the battlefield. He gave the state the ability to formally designate organizations as terrorist groups.
New at 5, Governor Ron DeSantis signing a bill into law. It allows the state to identify domestic terrorist organizations. House Bill 1471 prohibits the use of legal frameworks like Sharia law and courts and cracks down on organizations it determines are domestic terrorist groups.
But we've been very strong in Florida from the beginning on all of this nonsense and doing whatever we can to keep the people of this state safe.
The bill's signing comes a few months after he designated CARE Florida and the Muslim Brotherhood as foreign terrorist organizations in an executive order.
Now let that sink in. Not just criticize, not just investigate, but designate, which means legal exposure, asset risk, civil liability, real consequences. And suddenly names that were once treated as untouchable, like the Council on American Islamic Relations, and even connections that are tied to the Muslim Brotherhood are now being pulled into a completely different category. This is not symbolic. This is not messaging. This is power. Because once you cross into that territory, everything changes. Funding, operations, influence, all of it, really. Now, for anybody who thought Florida was just making noise, yeah, this is where it got very, very real. But here's the part that really flips the script. This wasn't just about Florida. This is even bigger than that, because once you zoom out, you start seeing a pattern. You've got Donald Trump at the national level already taking a hard stance, especially when it comes to groups like the Muslim Brotherhood. Then you've got Arizona lawmakers that are moving to block foreign legal systems in their courts. And now Florida steps in with force. I mean, you see what's happening here, right? This is not random. This is not isolated. This is coordinated momentum, state by state, layer by layer. And the message is getting even louder every single time. We see what's happening and we're not ignoring it. And when that kind of momentum builds, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads real fast. So now here's where a lot of people went from, okay, this is interesting, to wait, this is actually happening? Because before Florida made its move, something else had already set off alarms in Texas, specifically a place called Josephine, a quiet suburb, not exactly the kind of place that you expect to become a national headline. And yet right there, plans are underway for what was described as a fully self-contained community. Homes, mosques, school, clinics, all centered around one shared identity. Now again, on the surface, you might say, okay, communities build communities. Fair enough. But here's what really raised eyebrows. This wasn't just a neighborhood. This was described as something closer to a parallel structure, like a system within a system. And once that idea hit the public, yeah, that's when everything changed, because suddenly this wasn't theoretical. This was not what if scenarios. This was visible. This was tangible right here in the United States.
Welcome to the future of living. Welcome to Epic City. Nestled in the heart of Josephine, Texas, it is about 20 miles and 20 minutes from Epic. Commercial areas,
الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Welcome to Epic 2.0. Epic City is more than just a neighborhood. It's a way of life, a meticulously designed community that brings Islam to the forefront, a community that blends with nature, crafted to elevate your living experience. With single-family homes, multi-family townhomes and apartments, senior living, and in the heart a mosque and a school. Parks for Eid prayer, carnivals and community events. Multiple fields for sports including soccer, cricket, tennis, and volleyball. And public schools 10 minutes away. Epic City, a housing community where we celebrate diversity and promote unity. Our community is designed to foster a sense of belonging and inclusivity for all residents, regardless of their background.
And people started asking a very simple question. Wait. Hang on a second. How far does this go? And here's the real answer. Not very far, because the response in Texas was immediate. It was decisive, and honestly, it was pretty overwhelming. So you had Texas Governor Greg Abbott stepping in. You had Ken Paxton stepping in, and not just those guys. Multiple Texas state agencies got involved. Even the HUD was pulled into the situation. This was not a warning. This was not please adjust your plans. This was a shutdown, full stop. And then came the part that really sent the message. Voters, regular voters, people like me and you, going to the ballot and overwhelmingly, something like 95% supporting a ban on foreign legal systems in their courts? Think about that, guys. Think about it, right? This is not a divided response. This is not half the country disagrees. This is a landslide.
Governor Abbott signed a bill banning Sharia law, the legislation created after a religious rights battle erupted in Collin County. Good evening, I'm Clarice Tinsley. Governor Abbott was in North Texas for that bill signing banning residential properties from creating Sharia law compounds. This comes after state Republican leaders raised concerns about a Muslim-centric development plan in Collin County called Epic City. Fox 4 Stephen Dial is there and has more. Stephen.
Clarice, Governor Abbott says that this law was needed, in his words, to prevent discrimination based on religion. As you mentioned, some lawmakers were concerned and passed bills after the East Plano Islamic Center had plans to make a development for people of the Muslim faith in Josephine. Now, while Sharia law is not mentioned in this bill language the governor signed Friday, he says it intends to ban residential property developments like Epic City from creating Sharia law compounds. Abbott said that this law is not targeting Muslims. He says it prevents any housing discrimination on the basis of any religion.
Regardless of which religion it is, people are not going to be able to establish these comprehensive, large-scale developments that limit only people of one religious belief to that area. And you can only buy if you're part of that religion. You can only steal if you're part of that religion. Religious discrimination is in violation of Texas law.
Now, the plan for the development included 1,000 homes, a mosque, and school. The developers for the community say that people from all religions will be welcome. In June, the U.S. Department of Justice closed an investigation into Epic City. Now, there have still been multiple state investigations into this type of development, and it's important to note that the lawyers representing those for this development say that this is what they call racial profiling.
So when you combine government action with public support like that, this is not just policy, this is momentum. And by the time Florida made its move, the blueprint was already there. So now I want to zoom out just for a second, because this is not just about Florida or Texas. The argument being made here is this. This happened before. In Europe, places like France, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, not overnight, not with dramatic announcements, but slowly, gradually. One decision at a time, one compromise at a time. And the claim is, by the time people realize how much has changed, it was already deeply embedded. Now, whether you agree with that comparison or not, here's the point the narrative is pushing. Leaders in places like Florida, they're looking at those examples and they're saying, yeah, we're not waiting around to find out. We're not FAFOing, okay? And this is what really raises the stakes, because now it's not just about reacting to what's happening today. It's about preventing what some believe could happen tomorrow. And when decisions are framed like that, they tend to come fast, and then they tend to come strong. So now we come full circle. They thought Florida would submit. That was the assumption, that nothing would happen, that Florida leadership would hesitate, that people wouldn't push back. Instead, Ron DeSantis and the Florida legislature stepped in. They passed the law, they expanded the authority, and they sent a message that was about as subtle as a brick through a window. This is how it works here. Not later, not maybe, now. And when you combine that with what happened in Texas, with actions in Arizona, with the national stance from Donald Trump, you start to see why people are saying that this is not just one story. It's a shift. It's a turning point. It's a signal to the rest of the country. Whether you see it as protection or overreaction, one thing is clear. The idea that Florida would just sit back and do nothing, yeah, That didn't happen. Now I want to hear from you guys. Did Florida make the right move here, or did they go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments down below. I read more of those comments than you think, believe me. And of course, if you made it this far, you already know. Go ahead and hit the like button on your way out. Subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video with someone who still thinks nothing ever changes, because clearly something just did.